giving women the right to vote. And so we're going to look at some cartoons about suffragists, and we're going to look at some cartoons by them, and then we're going to kind of look at maybe some interpretations or some portrayals of modern women, depending on how long I meander. If you look at my PowerPoint, you'll see like 1 out of 39,470 trillion slides. Don't worry, we're not going to use them all, right? I always have extra slides in here. So questions, yeah, I'll try and take them as I go. Again, if I miss them or if Christina misses it, don't be offended, we'll catch them at the end. And the handout I gave you actually has a little bingo game. So you can try and get a bingo by marking off things that I talk about as they come up. And I give you a link to the Declaration of Sentiments that was written in 1848. I wouldn't suggest you read it now, it's 3 pages. And if you read it now, it will take away from the pearls I'm about to offer you. And then I also have some questions for how to analyze political cartoons. I don't think we'll get to do any sort of real formal analyses, but for whenever you come across a political cartoon, I think it's a good format. We'll try and use some of the questions on that handout later. But for right now, let's start talking about this one. This is, again, the dangers of giving women the right to vote. And if you take a look at this cartoon, you can probably see some of the most horrifying dangers you can imagine, because clearly whenever there's a group of women together, what we do is we talk about men, and all we do is talk badly about men. So of course, the first thing we do when we gather would be to say, down with men, down with men. We wouldn't talk books or politics or anything. So there's that. That's one of the dangers. And you see here, it says at the suffragette meetings, you can hear some plain things and see them too. So, oh my God, the worst thing a woman could be, you know, in this era was not pretty. I mean, it was a burden to her husband and everybody, and to the family who was trying to palm her off on a man. So again, we can hear their plain speak, but also horror of horrors, we can see all these plain women together, and we know their real agenda is to force men to marry people who aren't attracted to them. Not that women ever had to marry unattractive men. Only men have to the burden of worrying about marrying unattractive women. And of course, all old lonely women will be given a husband and a chicken in the pot as well, right? So these are some of the scary dangers. And notice then we've got Votes for Women up here, the leader who could only bear to put on her bedroom slippers to go out in public is demanding votes for women. So we see, right? This is just a bad idea. If you have comments, I probably can't see them because of the PowerPoint. So Christina, I'm guessing you'll let me know. Now this next one, this first one is about suffragists, and this one is, this next one we have here is by a suffragist. And so we have this contradiction, right? This cartoon points to the hypocrisy of not giving women the right to vote. So this is where, like, thinking is not womanly. Women aren't supposed to think, and generally we know they can't. And if they do, they cease to be women. They are unsexed by this masculine activity of thinking. And so we have this cartoon that says, well, it doesn't unsex her to scrub and work very hard on the floor. It doesn't unsex her to care for people and see blood and carry out like bones and hold people down as they're, you know, getting things amputated. And it doesn't unsex her to go to the factory and work all day, or to, I'm not sure if she's gift wrapping or if she's doing laundry. That's a tough one to see. So it doesn't harm her or unsex her to do any of these things, to wait on men, of course, that never unsexes her. But of course, this, going to the polls, good God, suddenly, right, women can't be women anymore if they're thinking about politics. So I like these. These are the fears, again, the dangers, right? And then this is a cartoon from New Zealand. Well, New Zealand comes back in our conversation, but this, New Zealand gave women the right to vote, universal suffrage in 1893. And this is a cartoon by a New Zealander, and it's posited as an anti-suffrage cartoon. I couldn't find out too much about him. It seems probably likely that it was, sort of, but when you read this cartoon, you can't help but feel that it shores up the hypocrisy or the problem of, you know, one of the men's great big fears was that women would just reverse the power dynamic. And clearly if they had that fear, they knew the power dynamic was wrong. But again, we don't talk about people being unsexed. You've got this woman, not only is she wearing pants, but they're clownish. They don't belong on her, this whole outfit. But she comes in and she's just been at the Men's Protection Society after her big important job. And she comes home and there are children fighting and the baby's squalling. And she says, what, dinner not ready? What have you been doing? And of course, the poor man is so beaten down by this, and he can only, he hasn't even bothered to get out of his slippers today. Clearly he's been, goofing around. What's interesting to me is that it seems to me this would be pointing out the hypocrisy, but allegedly this really was men's deeply held fears that this power dynamic would get reversed and this is what it would look like. And we have, of the ones I can read, right, we have man proposes but woman disposes, and we have frailty, the name is man. So basically everything here is gender reversed, and what a frightening future it would be, because it says this is a picture of the future by our much married artist. Now the artist had been married I think 3 years at this point, but when he wrote this cartoon, so I don't know, maybe he was having a bad day, or maybe he just didn't get it. I'm guessing that might have been it. New Zealand comes back, though. We'll talk about New Zealand in a few minutes. I have to say that I promised you certain things in this talk, but the truth is, you're kind of stuck with wherever my mind wanders. So, I mean, it'll wander on topic, but you're sort of stuck with my meanderings. I hope that works out for y'all. Christina, are there any questions or comments so far?
Hi. No, not so far, but again, I'm just going to type into the chat so people see that there is a space for them to ask questions, but I'll let you know if anything comes up.
Okay, and if anybody has a question or comment, feel free to send them in. We're going to move on then to these first three cartoons have been cartoons about the perceived danger or the hypocrisy of giving women the right to vote. And this fourth one gets at some of the more key ideas of why there are a bunch of other agendas. It wasn't just men's fear of this power dynamic being reversed. But if you look here, we have what's called the Anti-Suffrage Quartet, which is funny because it's kind of a play on word of suffragette, which is a demeaning term, but it's an Anti-Suffrage Quartet. And so at the bottom, the caption reads, their repertoire includes all the familiar sophistical melodies. Protect the home, a sweet woman's sphere, the home. Keep dear old mother out of politics. Oh, leave things as they be. Let the woman mind the baby. Let him use her influence, etc., etc. So it's sort of a boring repertoire. We've heard all these tunes before. We don't need to hear them again. And then, of course, the song they're singing is Women Do Not Want the Vote. If you look at these arrows here, I've labeled them because each of these members of the choir, it has a label, and this man said, his tag says white slaver. This just says anti. This says big business or big biz, and this says liquor. So if anybody wants to comment on this cartoon at this point, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on it. Is there anything you observe about it at all that strikes you?
We just had a question about how to get the handouts. So we have posted the link above, but we can post it again at the end.
Is it still there?
Oh, yeah, it's still there. And Laura Key says,
can everybody see it?
Yeah, everyone should be able to see it. It says to all attendees and panelists, but we can always post it again at the end. It's
a Google Doc, although it'd be nice if people had it now because it's a follow along. So maybe I should repost the link.
Yeah, we can repost it.
Let me try that. If I can find the chat box. Do I have to stop sharing to do that?
No, if you kind of scroll down, can you see your banner show up at the bottom?
Well, it's at the top, but it says participants and Q&A.
Check out participants.
Nope, I think I have to stop sharing. So I won't do it for now, but I'll come back to that.
Okay, we'll share it again at the end, everyone. Thanks. Okay, so we did have a couple of questions.
If you can't get to it, let us know now, and I'll just stop sharing my screen for a minute. Yeah, what are the questions?
So yeah, they can't get to it. If you want to, go ahead and stop sharing and share that link again, and then I'll send the questions over to you.
Okay.
Okay. So Laura Keys says nothing has changed in over 100 years. Thank you for the comment, Laura. And again, from Laura, liquor equals drug companies now.
Ooh, that's a nice analogy. That's a very nice analogy. Okay, I am trying to share. Let's see if this works, this link here.
Oh, yep, I see it.
Okay,
It's there.
okay.
All right, and then the person above Katie says, why is the woman's sign facing downward while the men's signs are front facing?
Oh my God, you guys, these are great. So now we've got the modern updated analogies from Laura, and exactly, why would hers be down while the men's are up? Any thoughts, Katie? Well, it was Katie who asked that, right? Or commented on that?
Yes, it was Katie, yes.
There's a couple of thoughts about that, and one is that obviously the men seem to be just as loud as she is, and that maybe the only way she can be loud is to put her music down. The other is that it's upside down and she's anti, and this idea that perhaps, you know, we're just going to turn the world upside down if indeed women get the vote. Another idea is that she's not competent enough even to sing, so how could she get the vote? That she can't even follow along with the choir. So there's all kinds of possibilities for that. I couldn't actually find a definitive one, but I hope that answers. But I'm happy you noticed that, yeah. We also, these men all have very particular interests, and it seems like she's just anti, and she doesn't really, she just knows she's supposed to be, so. Okay, now that we've depressed you, I agree, it is the same. It is still the same. We have made some progress, so we'll take a look. I've only got 3 dates for the test. I'm kidding, there's no test. I've got 3 dates here. You probably know this, 2 of them. In 1848, there was a convention in Seneca Falls. It was the first women's convention of its time in the United States, and it was organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had moved to Seneca Falls and was a mother of 7, but was really, I don't want to say unfulfilled, but she was bored and restless being a mother of 7. She needed more intellectual stimulation. And she had made friends, she met Susan B. Anthony, but she'd made friends with Lucretia Mott in England. They had done some anti-abolition things. And so the feminist movement, or this movement comes out of some abolitionist work that women did together. And we're gonna go to Seneca Falls in a minute, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. But 31 years later, the 15th Amendment is ratified. And here's a rub. It begins to break apart alliances that women have. Now, if we take a look, we'll come back to the slide in a minute, but you'll see these 4 people, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, and Ida B. Wells, were all integral to the abolitionist movement as well as the suffrage movement. And Sojourner Truth, one time, apparently when Sojourner Truth walked into a room, she gripped the room. When she spoke, people listened. And one time they were before the Seneca Falls, there was a women's meeting and or gathering, I believe it was before, might be after. The women were sort of losing ground to the heckling men, and Sojourner Truth stood up and gave her "Ain't I a Woman" speech. And boy, that changed the tide and you know, gathered the attention again. At the Seneca Falls Convention, there were 12 amendments to the Declaration of Sentiments, and in the handout I posted, there's a link to the declaration at Seneca Falls. So the Declaration of Sentiments, it's really worth a read even today. So again, I will say it was very forward thinking, but it turns out that the women at the time kind of really didn't mean it to be, but allowed it to go ahead to be just for white women. And this becomes a problem because we have these 4 staunch supporters of women's rights of any color, and when white women had to choose that maybe to go forward, but only be able to move forward without black women, many of them chose to go forward without black women who would help them. And Frederick Douglass, by the way, the 12th Amendment to the Declaration of Sentiments was for women to get the vote. And even staunch feminists of the day were really afraid of that. Frederick Douglass gets up and speaks, and he says, the abolitionist movement is so intertwined with white women he said, I wouldn't be free without their help. I'm here to help them do this. For him, these 2 things were intertwined. For the women, again, when it came time to choose, their idea was, well, we'll get ours and then we'll come back and help you, you know, if there's time. So Ida B. Wells was also kind of sidelined when they had their big march on Washington, and she, legend has it, waited. The black women were told they could march at the back of the line, and she waited on the sidelines and sort of jumped in with the women up front and marched right alongside them. So, and in any case, there were other stories about that, and that's a whole topic unto itself. So I won't go there anymore. But again, the 15th Amendment gives black men the right to vote, but not women and not black women, and not white women and not black women. And so it begins to cause divisions in groups where people were already kind of afraid of power structures and already taking risks by having opinions. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but it's true. And then, of course, 100 years ago today, 72 years after Seneca Falls, the state of Tennessee, of all states, I find that fascinating, was the 36th state to ratify the 19th Amendment, thereby giving us universal suffrage. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a second, and we're going to take a quick trip to Seneca Falls, which we can't do in person right now, but I thought it'd be cool to see where this cool thing happened. So this is Google Earth, and as you can see, here's a little Elizabeth Cady Stanton's house. And then out walking, and one of the women was having a tea, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton, I believe, was having a tea, but Susan B. Anthony was visiting, and they happened to be walking along the street, and Amelia Bloomer introduced them. So there's a statue here where they met. Just across the way, we're gonna, so let me, and you're like, what, why are we looking at It's a Wonderful Life? I'll come back to that in just a second. This is the church at which the convention was held, the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And this whole area, it's a 6-acre area, has been turned into Women's Rights National Historical Park. It's closed now, but it includes the Elizabeth Cady Stanton home, and it includes, I wonder if any of you knew, I mean, I kind of learned about this, I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't know, but I hope we all, the National Women's Hall of Fame. And I would have thought that was in Washington, D.C., but it is here in Seneca Falls. And you can see here's the Hall of Fame. Here, this whole area is the park. And then right down across the street is the Methodist, the Methodist church, the street corner and the building where the convention took place. So we can zoom in on that, or you can just know that you can go to Google Earth and look up Seneca Falls. I did not know until I did this Google Earth thing that this is It's a Wonderful Life bridge. This is where Jimmy Stewart is allegedly going to throw himself off and kill himself. This is a model for Bedford Falls, and so there's an actual museum of It's a Wonderful Life. I love that movie, but there's some issues with sexism there too. But so, so moving on. In any case, there's our quick little field trip to Seneca Falls, which would be great to actually go to one day. But I'm going to wait till the park is open. Any thoughts on that? Any questions? Anybody want to see anything up close?
We got a question in, and it says, I see the amendment that allowed women to vote was 50 to 46. Curious if you know the split by which the 15th Amendment was ratified.
No, as a matter of fact, I don't. I'm sorry. No. I'll leave that there.
That's okay. Hey, if anybody else is at home and looks it up, you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. That would have been a good. Okay, so we're back. We're back here with our dates. We've talked about these folks, and then the 15th Amendment really does cause issues, and again, that's a whole other topic. And so we've been to Seneca Falls. And now before we look at some other cartoons, I want to tell you in 1908, 12 years before we get the vote, this is what women's suffrage looked like. 4 countries and 4 states. In Canada, okay. So you can see there's parliamentary suffrage, but not equal suffrage. And there's municipal suffrage. I'm sorry, they had municipal suffrage, but not, okay. So there's various kinds of suffrage, but in 1893, so that's the year that Chicago had its World's Fair, New Zealand is the first country to give women the right to vote. Now, in 1869, Wyoming, so that's well before New Zealand, but Wyoming was the first state to give women the right to vote. Well, okay, New Jersey was, but then they revoked it. And then Utah did, but then the Mormons complained, and so they revoked it. So it's not a linear process. Wyoming gave women the right to vote and never revoked it from 1869 on. And New Zealand and Wyoming did it kind of for the same reason, and that is they thought that if they promised women equal rights, they would get more women to come, because both of them had a dearth of women. And the statistics in Wyoming were there were 6,000 men and 1,000 women, and they wanted more women, and they thought this would be the draw. So New Zealand was first, Finland was second, Australia was third, and Norway was fourth. And then we had these 4 states, and like I say, Utah withdrew their right at one point, or our right at one point. And then this says 15 countries to give women the right to, it wasn't just 15, but this was a list that I found, and this person, I found these interesting, but there were more than 15 countries that gave women the right to vote before the United States. And this is a map of suffrage. And you can see that people always think Africa is the last one to do anything, which is a stereotype and incorrect. But in 1919 and in 1920, 2 African countries had already given women the right to vote, and we come along around 1920, after Canada, after Russia. And here we have 1893, New Zealand. So again, we're back in New Zealand. This is another cartoon from New Zealand, and there was a move there, and really largely attributed to one woman who pushed for women to get the vote. You'll see this cartoon was done in August of 1893, and the vote to give women suffrage doesn't pass until September. And this is the 25,000 signatures that went to the Parliament. And so we have the carpet knight, Sir John, covers the floor of the House with a little petition. And he says, well, gentlemen, how do you like the pattern? And the pattern, of course, is going to be signature after signature after signature after signature of women demanding the right to vote. And they got it. This wasn't part of this wasn't part of cartoons, but I just found these maps so fascinating. This is what part of the United States had given women the rights to, we're back local here, by the way, had given women the right to vote by 1919. And all these states over here use full suffrage. Where you would think it would be least likely that women got suffrage, it's all in the West. And where you think, right, well, the South, maybe not, but I mean, we think these more quote unquote progressive states, right, would have given women the right to vote, but these are the no suffrage states. And so it's fascinating to me as we look, it'd be nice to overlay this to a map today with other issues, but Illinois, 1913, for giving women the right to vote in local things, and then in 1919, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin ratify the federal, the Universal Suffrage Act. And some sites say Wisconsin did it first. Illinois claims to have ratified that an hour before Wisconsin. It's tough to say, because I wanted to know, well, what number was Illinois? And Illinois says, we were the first state east of the Mississippi to give women the right to vote. Okay, but what number were you in general? The problem is, as I say, it's not linear. New Jersey had given the right to vote and revoked it. Utah had given the right and then revoked it. So it's not necessarily linear. So I guess you got to go with your first, and Illinois is positing itself as like a really good state. We were first this side of the east side of the Mississippi, and then they claim to be the first state to ratify it. Wisconsin claims that they were first. So I guess that Bears Packers rivalry goes back to giving women the right to vote, clearly. And then we have a cartoon by a suffragist painting the same map, which states have given women the right to vote. So and then this kind of goes back to Mississippi was one of the states where the men would sort of say to the women, we're on it, we've got this for you. And sort of at the last minute, the votes would never pass. The man who marries Lucy Stone, Mr. Blackwell, he's from Massachusetts, he was a anti-slavery guy, and he thought, well, let's give women the right to vote, because he was afraid that they were going to take away the Fifth Amendment. He was afraid that Black men were going to be disenfranchised, but he did feel very deeply that women should have the right to vote. And this is an odd sort of thinking, but he thought that if women in Mississippi got the vote, they would vote just like their husbands, and then the South would feel in control of their politics again. I mean, that's a convoluted logic, but that's what he was thinking. In any case, Mississippi kept sort of promising and then not delivering. So it's sort of like Lucy and Charlie Brown, right? The football keeps getting pulled away. I'm going to do these, and then we're going to move into the next sort of segment of this, if So let me do these two and then see if there's any questions on. Now these are by Nina Allender, and if you don't know Nina Allender, she was trained as a classic artist. She met Lucy Paul, and Alice Paul, and Alice Paul said, use your art for our movement, which is the National Women's Party, and use it for suffrage. So Nina Allender has a lot of cartoons that she did for women's suffrage. And here's one that this is 1918, just ended war, the First World War. And Woodrow Wilson will not, or has maybe just tentatively come out, but he has up until a certain point not actually supported women's suffrage. And so we have these cartoons, this cartoon saying even Germany surrenders to democracy. And so this idea that it's kind of the Muhammad Ali thing, why should I go to Vietnam and fight for rights that I can't get in my own country? And the women were protesting outside the White House saying, why should we be fighting a war against another country when we can't even have rights in our own home? And they were reviled and they were attacked as well. So Nina Allender's goal, one of her goals, was to portray them as peaceful, thoughtful, respectful women. So that's part of the subtext of her cartoon here. And then if you got to see the Alice Paul presentation last night, which was phenomenal, she talks about the fact that once they got the right to vote, Alice Paul moved on to the next thing, the Equal Rights Amendment. So this is 3 years after women get the right to vote, and Nina Allender is still writing cartoons saying, let's do world equal rights, let's get United States equal rights, and let's make sure the states have them too, right? So we've kind of gotten the vote, but the rights still aren't equal, and the sky's the limit. Look what women have done so far. We can keep going. So the way suffragists portray themselves and the way they are portrayed, of course, are sort of different. I want to get to some modern portrayals. So we're going to move to the next part of the presentation. Before we do that, though, I've liked the comments so far. Does anybody have any others to offer or any comments you would like to make?
So we got a question. What prompted states to revoke the rights?
With the Mormons, it was a religious issue. With New Jersey, apparently it just became inconvenient, and they thought when you read about it, it sounds like they're like, oops, we thought it was for everybody. Now they didn't want to be the only ones. They didn't want to be the only ones giving up, the male power. So generally it was about, it came back into those gender dynamics. Why should we allow women to rule? When you read the Declaration of Sentiments, though, it says, look, they're willing to, as a widow, take my money for my taxes. This, again, is, representation, taxation without representation. So that document talks about, so the states, again, were sort of, they didn't want to seem henpecked. I mean, basically, that's what it comes down to. It's ridiculous, but they didn't want to seem like, oh, we're not a manly state. It's annoying. Anything else? I want to right now. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, when did this come in? Can you say more about the importance of cartoons? Were they the social media of the day?
Cartoons kind of came in. The thing about cartoons, and there's a very famous story that may or may not be true, but what Thomas Nast was the most famous cartoonist of the 19th century, and Nast could paint a pretty satirical cartoon, and allegedly Boss Tweed. Thomas Nast says that he brought down Boss Tweed's ring in New York with his cartoons because whether Tweed said it or not, it speaks to the power of the cartoon, and the power of the cartoon is that Tweed says, stop them damn pictures. My constituents can't read, but they can certainly understand a drawing. So the thing about cartoons is that they're quick shorthand. You can capture an awful lot with an image and then few words. And even if you're not literate, you can still see there are different sized women and there are women looking beyond the frame. You can certainly see that there's groups of women gathered against a backdrop of whether policemen or soldiers, right, fighting for something. So I think, and cartoons were cheap. And again, I think the value of them in any, even today, right, is you don't necessarily have to be literate or literate in some of the issues. You can still pick up some of the key ideas. Does that answer the question well enough?
I think that sounds great. We actually had another question come in too. Does history shortchange Harriet Tubman in the fight for women's rights?
Harriet Tubman is such an interesting figure. And I don't, let's see, I don't know that Harriet Tubman was just fighting for freedom, and it probably would have been for anyone, but I don't, maybe, but I don't know that women's rights was her issue as much as freedom from slavery. So those may or may not be separate, but I think I think her primary mission was abolitionist, and she was going to free men or women as needed. So I think one could argue that she's underrated. But I don't, and maybe it's because she wasn't necessarily, although Sojourner Truth wasn't formally educated either, but you know, we don't have a body of Harriet Tubman's writings. We just know about her acts of heroic bravery, which were, some people dismissed and said she had a head injury. She didn't know what she was doing, which is, you know, hooey, but maybe she is. So that, maybe her face should be on that other slide. But again, I really think that's a topic to pick up for a whole nother conversation, because it would be a great one. If anybody listens to the History Chicks, you can find out a lot about, it's a podcast. And once you can get over the, I find annoying banter between them, the history is really good. So they have 2, I think, different episodes on Harriet Tubman. So I would check that out. Let's move on, if that's okay. Is there any more questions?
No, I think we're all caught up.
And again, if I haven't answered a question satisfactorily, be sure to let me know at the end, and I'll try and address it a little bit more. So before we get to modern portrayals of women, I guess I wanted to show you the very incomplete list of women who have gotten a nomination or run for the office of president. Excuse me just a second. I have this timeline here. I like timelines. They help me organize things. But 1848, we have the Declaration of Sentiments. And not that much longer, right? We've got, what, 30 years, 31 years? We have our first female candidate running for president of the United States. Some people say that Victoria Woodhull is not a legitimate candidate because she was not yet 35. Her argument was that she would be 35 just 7 months after the inauguration, making her 35 when she was president. So some people don't consider her the first legitimate one, but she ran a full campaign, right? Not long after that, Belva Lockwood ran as a National Women's Party, and she said, I cannot vote, but I can be voted for. And she and Susan B. Anthony had sort of a falling out here, in that Susan B. Anthony wanted to go state by state and trod loudly, but less loudly than Belva Lockwood. Belva Lockwood said, why wouldn't I run for national office? What better way to bring attention to our movement? And so that, again, that was another fracturing of the women's groups. And then it takes us not quite 200 years, 80 years, I guess, before we get Margaret Chase Smith actually got nominations for president at the Republican Convention of 1964. And you'll see why in a cartoon or two later, why that happened. But I don't think too many people will remember or know about Margaret Chase Smith. What I find interesting is you can find cartoons about Victoria Woodhull and about Belva Lockwood, not flattering. Margaret Chase Smith, I can only find one. And you'll see it in just a minute. And then in 1972, something like wonderful happens. And by the way, this is not a complete list, because there are people who were for parties or who ran but didn't get nominations. But so these are the major, maybe I shouldn't have included Pat Schroeder. We'll talk about that in about 12 seconds. But we have, in 1972, we have an African-American woman, we have an Asian-American woman, and we have a socialist. This is, in 1972, all, none, all taken seriously, but not taken seriously, right? Shirley Chisholm and Patsy Mink went on to continue their work in the Senate and in Congress for a number of years, being parts of important legislation about, well, about everything, but often about human issues that are called women's issues. And Linda Jenness is still involved in the Socialist Workers Party, or was at the last I heard. I couldn't find too much. I couldn't find really any current information on her. But I think that's amazing that this was in 1972, and we know the women's movement had just sort of, broken certain thresholds and was moving forward, and that these two women have served long and well in Congress afterwards. Pat Schroeder actually had a very short, it was probably about, I don't know, a 12-hour run. She had a very short run. Gary Hart dropped out of the Democratic, out of the race as a Democratic candidate, and then Pat Schroeder put herself in sort of to take his place. She decided to withdraw. She wept. She got reviled for that. She says she still gets hate mail for that. Now, of course, it's all the rage for men to cry and show their humanity, but women still, she said, write to her and say that it just proved every stereotype about women that could have been proven. So I find that interesting. And then, of course, we all know that Hillary Clinton, so this doesn't put Geraldine Ferraro in here, who was a vice presidential candidate. It doesn't put Kamala Harris in here. They're vice presidential candidates. And then this link here gives a far more complete list than this. But what I find interesting is disparaging cartoons, heroic cartoon, no cartoons. And I might need a better reference librarian because I found no cartoons about these women at all, good or bad, which I find fascinating. And you'll see, of course, you can't wake up without seeing you couldn't wake up for a long time without seeing a Hillary cartoon. So let's take a look at some of these. I'm going to actually skip those. We'll come back to those. Those are kind of fun. And we'll come back to them if we have time. But I don't want to tax your patience. I don't want this to be a hostage situation. So what I'm going to ask you to do, it said raise your hands. I thought I would be able to see you, but I can't. So what I would ask you to do is to, if you've got that, I don't know if you're able to do the download, but just to sort of look and see, answer these questions. How are the women, some I couldn't find images for, but I found quotes about. So there's 2 slides where I ask you to do the same thing. I was going to try and put you in groups, but that's not possible for this. So just take a couple minutes and look. You can chat to each other in the comments if you want to say some things, but take a look at these and how are these women portrayed? And then I'm going to have you look at the other one and talk about how women are portrayed or how they're described. And I'm just going to be, it'll be very tough because I'm a professor, right? But I'm going to be silent for a few minutes, which will make us all uncomfortable. But I just want to give people time to kind of look at these and sort of see what women are portrayed to be. And as you come to some conclusions, if you would put them in the chat box, it might be kind of fun to talk about them before we do the next slide. You don't have to be done yet, but if you, as you begin to think of things, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts in the chat box, that would be kind of fun to hear about or to see.
So we do have a comment or a question. Who is the man in the lower right corner of the right cartoon?
Over here?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a McCarthy candidate, and this is, if you recall, we'll go back to her, the woman in there is Margaret Chase Smith. And Margaret Chase Smith was one of the very first, even though she was Republican, right? One of the very first, most vociferous people against Joseph McCarthy and his quote unquote anti-communist witch hunt. And she bore no goodwill to him. She wanted him gone. And so this says Senator Margaret Smith. She was a senator and she was running against, in the main primary, against well, the man who anybody who supported McCarthy, she was going to trounce, right? Any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, so we've got one from Robert. The Raquel Welch cartoon, both sexist and racist, and Pat looks ahead of her time with the mask. I think that was a tissue.
Oh, that's funny. Yes, that's right. That's so funny. I hadn't even made that connection. That is funny. So these are 2 quotes, And Raquel Welch is, and Shirley Chisholm are, I couldn't find cartoons. To be honest, this is Red Fox. When Shirley Chisholm announced that she was running for president, and I know this is my stereotype, and I know that white people and black people don't all think as a monolith, but Red Fox's comment about Shirley Chisholm running for president was, I sure as hell prefer Raquel Welch to Shirley Chisholm. So yes, sexist and yeah, just certainly sexist. And I love this about Pat Schroeder wearing the mask, right? This is when she cried. She decided she was not going to run for president. And as she's announcing that she has decided it's not the moment for her, she got choked up and wept. And then her husband wiped away her tears. And this is when people thought, oh, women are weak, right? Women are weak. How dare she embarrass us like this? So if there's no other questions, I'll talk a little bit about it. We've already talked about Margaret Chase Smith. I believe Margaret Chase Smith was ahead of her time and fairly a moderate. I think now, you know, we hear the word Republican, or I do, and I think extreme, but maybe some people are thinking of that about the Democrats. So,
one quick question, Julia. So,
yeah.
did we decide then that the man in the corner of the right cartoon is just like a stand-in for any sort of McCarthy supporter, and she's going to skewer any
Yes.
McCarthy supporter?
Right,
So
and they're
not
all
a real
ducking.
person.
So this is Joe McCarthy himself, and then this is a straw figure, that there's nobody who's going to be able to stand up to Margaret Chase Smith because she proved herself already. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't explain that well. Yeah. Right. So this is Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to run for president, legitimate or not, right? Linda Jenness was only 31 too, but she made it onto 25 ballots, state ballots, even though she was only 31. But you notice she's got the wings, and it says, "Be saved by free love." And the caption for this, let me go to the caption for that. The caption is, "Get thee behind me, get thee behind me, Satan," is what this woman is saying. And it says, "Get thee behind me, Mrs. Satan." The wife here is carrying the burden of children and a drunk husband and saying to Victoria Woodhull, "I'd rather travel the hardest path of matrimony than follow your footsteps." And Mrs. Satan, Victoria Woodhull, notice she's got the horns here. She's got the wings from hell. And so free love, Victoria Woodhull wasn't saying, you know, throw the keys in the bowl and everybody go home with somebody different, whose ever keys you draw. That's not what free love meant to her. Free love meant you get to choose who you marry, you get to own your own property, and you are able to divorce if the marriage no longer works. So that was for her a key idea. She was an investor. She got into weird stuff later, but she was actually a smart, savvy woman, and she just felt that women should not be held back by poor marriages and you know, lackadaisical men. So again, though, anybody taking charge like that has to be satanic or witch-like. So we have Pat Schroeder crying. We have the woman who's the witch who wants to be free love. Again, women are not eligible for politics because they don't understand. They don't understand, you know, the true family dynamics. They are too weak. Here, she is not sexy. She's not sexy. So what good is she to me? Shirley Chisholm, man, I don't know if you know anything about her, but wow. Yeah. And then, of course, Margaret Chase Smith, the pure white Republican woman who had stood up to McCarthy, right, is seen here as a hero. What I find interesting is this is about Linda Jenness, and she's 31, has a scrubbed face, steady white, wide blue eyes, short sandy hair. So she looks like a 10-year-old farm girl. We will diminish her. We'll say she's cute. And isn't that cute that a farm girl who's, will, take away her education too. She was educated. But she's not a fire-breathing militant. She's cool, articulate, and matter of fact. We'll diminish her, and then we'll say, but she is kind of credible. So that's one sort of set of images about women, right? We've got two that are, this is fully positive, and this is kind of positive, but the rest are, not sexy, not smart, not strong. And then once again, we have the other candidates, right? And I threw in an Elizabeth Warren in here because it gets at some of the issues that, so we'll see. But I'm gonna, if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna give you a few more minutes. Some of these are pretty horrifying, honestly, but I put Victoria Woodhull in here because you guys are gonna be in separate groups, but now you're in, so there's some overlap here, but let me just have you take a look at these. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. And just a few minutes. And tell me if you think things have gotten better or worse, or as one of the first comments of the night was, whether they've stayed the same for women. Any comments?
Oh, we haven't seen anything in the chat yet.
I will go ahead and start. We've got Victoria Woodhull again. We know that she's Satan. God forbid a woman have a free thought. And then we have, not Raquel Welch, but we've got Elizabeth Warren, right? The new Democratic throuple, which is a threesome apparently. And it's Medicaid, it's the Democratic Party, and it's socialism. And of course, it's not that she can be taken down by her arguments, it's that everything is turned into a sex analogy. And we're going to put her in, you know, with a whip and as a dominatrix, because any woman who has an idea or wants to change the status quo is going to be dominating the party, right? And is going to be magical in her thinking. And still, we're going to try and demean her by making her not look sexy, even if we put her in sexy clothing. So then we have Patsy Mink, who was one of the most formidable women you could imagine, the lovely Oriental doll of a delicate and diminutive and attractive. Let's not take on her ideas. Let's take on her physical characteristics. Let's play into stereotypes and think, oh, the Oriental woman is a little doll, probably not too tough and probably will be submissive, right? In a stereotype, right? In a stereotype, I'm not saying that. This is Belva Lockwood. So she was the second one to run for president, obviously seen as just a puppet who will do whatever dance it takes to get the nomination. And Ben Garrison, I'm a little horrified that I actually put one of his cartoons on here. And this is like one of the least offensive ones that it's like kind of hard for me to stomach at all. But it says, hey, Hillary, it's time for your acceptance speech as she kisses the ring of globalism, which Ben Garrison sees as a devil. And then, of course, we've got Bernie cowering behind, right? So that Hillary is willing to grovel here. And there's this, that plays on this whole thing with Bill and Monica Lewinsky and blah, blah, blah. So again, women modernly are fair. We have Margaret Chase Smith and maybe Linda Jenness, who is a short and sandy-haired girl, right? But for the rest, you know, women who are candidates, and if we were to look at some of these other ones that I didn't show you, the Hillary got really poorly treated. Elizabeth Warren gets really poorly treated. So time has flown by for me. I hope for you. These, I mean, there's more cartoons and things to say, but these were the two images I kind of wanted to end on. We have learned from mistakes, I hope. I think, you know, there was just a falling out for the Black Lives Movement and the white moms thing. So maybe we haven't learned from our mistakes, but in the 60s and the 70s, people were saying, let's do this together. Vote, baby, vote. Voting is people power. And we had a student, Monica Anderson, draw a cartoon for the Women's Studies Committee for our flyer for all our events that had to be canceled because of COVID. But I wanted Monica's drawing to get out there because here she has a suffragette from the 1920s handing the ballot off to a young woman of today saying, get out there and vote. And so I have more meanderings and more thoughts, but you guys have all been very patient. But I'm going to stop there unless I hear cheers and acclaim. But I mean, those are kind of my thoughts about women in cartoons and other portrayals. And yeah, are there any questions?
Yeah, we got a comment in about the last cartoon slide, the one before last, that one, yeah. And she says, interesting that in the bottom left, while Hillary, a woman, is the main character, there are actually more men present in the cartoon. The
That is
one, yeah, the one she supposedly used in quotes and the one supposedly using her in quotes. All actions of women are interpreted through the lens of how they pertain to men.
oh my God, write that up. That is excellent. That's great. Yeah. And yeah. Oh, wow. Wow. You don't need me at this conversation. That was fantastic. Thank you. I wish I could add to that. I can't. Anybody else want to add to that? That was, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really astute.
Other comments?
Sherry says, wow. And Chip Goodman says, who are the two men on the front of the devil's chair?
I was just looking at that, Chip. I feel like it's Spiro Agnew and, oh, that's George Soros, right? But I cannot read this one. And I try, it can't be, I'm sorry, I meant Henry Kissinger. I feel like it's Kissinger.
I
But I
think
don't
you're
think it
right. I
is.
think that looks like Henry Kissinger.
Yeah. And this is George Soros. Soros funding. Don't give Ben Garrison the time of day. Like I was so conflicted about whether to put his cartoons in here. Just don't go to his website. Don't. By the way, I do want you to. I mean, I have here a shirt in the background that says "Nasty Women Vote," not because I'm trying to make a political statement, because again, when Donald Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, the thing he wanted to do, it wasn't about her ideas, it was sort of a personality trait, and the idea that women co-opted that and said, yeah, but we vote, we're not afraid of being nasty anymore. But in the day, right here, we come all the way back to our very first cartoon, and you know, it was horrifying or terrifying for a woman to be thought of as plain, and here we are, you know. So I think we've come a long way in the way I don't know that our portrayals have come a long way, but in the way we interpret portrayals of us, or the way we do or don't react to them, we've come a long way. So
there's a question about the George Washington cartoon. They just want to know what that is. Is he like wearing a skirt, or is that like a blanket? What is that?
Oh, this is a cartoon. This is funny because now to us it seems like that was an insult. There is on the Capitol building a painting called the Apotheosis of George Washington. So that George Washington is seen as, my cursor's not working, I'm sorry, I don't know. George Washington in the middle top is seen as a god. And on the side of him in the green is Victory blowing her horn to announce a victory. And on the left is Liberty, and she's wearing the Roman hat that says you are a free man or a free person, and carrying what the fasces, the sticks that were a symbol of liberty and of the Roman Empire, the symbol of right. And so the cartoon, so it was you know, who's going to beat George Washington? And this cartoonist over here, Yost, was saying, Coffin was saying, how dare? I mean, look how amazing Lucretia Mott and Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are. I mean, how arrogant are they to think that they could rise to the level of George Washington? And this was supposed to be a put down, and I look at that and go, yeah, in fact, let's get George Washington out of there. But this Capitol, if you go look at the original one, the painting, oh my God, the symbolism is so heavy and rife. But you know, there's a bunch of women up an archway we can't see, and it's like science and medicine and commerce, and so Washington sort of has, you know, domain over all of the United States functions. And the woman below her is Liberty, fighting for oh my gosh, I think she's also Liberty. I forget who the woman with the flag, the red, white, and blue is. Oh my gosh, how could I forget?
So we have another question from Julia. Where are political cartoons found today? We don't get Newsweek magazine anymore, and I don't encounter them elsewhere.
They're found on the line. They're found online now. They're editorial cartoons mostly. I'm going to tell you about Jen Sorensen, Sorenson. Just look her up. A lot of people don't like her because she's very wordy. Holy smokes, that woman is amazing, packs a punch. So Jen Sorensen, but I would say editorial cartoons are still the way to go. If you want international, there's a great thing called Cartooning for Peace, which was started by Kofi Annan of the UN, because he feels that cartoons from around the world, somebody asked a question about the value of cartoons, but Kofi Annan felt that if you can gather cartoons from around the world, people can get a quick, short perspective of what's happening in other countries. So I would suggest Jen Sorensen for American cartoons, and editorial cartoons of any newspaper are great. And then even if they infuriate you, and then cartooningforpeace.org, I think, or I'm pretty sure it's .org.
So we have just a couple more comments about the Hillary cartoon. So the little rat under the throne is CNN. And somebody else says, nice catch on the throne. Yeah, that we saw those images on there. There's lots of little things to catch in that cartoon.
Yeah, and Bernie shivering and sort of hung up on one of the prongs here. I mean, he's really just sort of meat for globalism, and can't even stand up for himself, right? And Hillary's willing to leave him there in the flames again is the idea.
Well, so we also have somebody asking, speaking about what's in your background, is that an RBG necklace?
This is a game. Yeah, first of all, people give me weird stuff. I have an RBG candle here that I could never ever burn. I just think it would be, not cool. And then I have my RBG coaster that I've been using all night. And this is a deck of cards called Woman Who Dare. Thanks for noticing my background stuff. It's supposed to be slide. And this is a game called I Dissent. And so it does have her dissent collar, one of her dissent collars, but it's supposed to be a game where you pose not legal questions, just sort of questions about, and then people vote on them. So yes, thank you for noticing my props for the talk.
And so following up on where do you find political cartoons these days, would you consider memes from the internet a political cartoon?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't consider them political cartoons, but dang, they are going to replace a political cartoon because they're good and they're short and they're succinct, and that they're kind of live. Yeah, but I love cartoons too much to sort of cede ground to the meme, but the meme, I think I have to. Yes, I would, 100%. And yeah, whoever asked that question, do you want to tell me why you thought about that or why you asked it? Memes are great.
Yeah, Katie, if you have a chance, put that in there. And then following up, we've got some people who are saying they'd love to see the remaining cartoons or the remaining ones. I think that means the other, maybe something you have in your slides you didn't show. I don't know. I think we saw them all, but.
Yeah, you guys I have some. Let's see. Let me go back to, we saw the Apotheosis, and this one I think is interesting. This is Belva Lockwood was running for president, and so they said, oh, it's based on the toboggan of women's rights. And when you do a close-up on women's rights, somebody was complaining that the cartoonist really didn't understand politics at all, because this is a women's rights toboggan, and it's got the Prohibition Party running with them, and we have Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but they'd already had their falling out, so it made no sense that they were on the same on the same toboggan. So I just like that because that's Victoria Woodhull. I think then most of the other cartoons I have here are from Nina Allender, because I really just like the way she portrayed the suffragists. And so we have one victory, and this is our flag as a suffragist, and she portrays them as a competent actioning, but even their signs are reflective. And so we've got, we shall fight for the things we've always carried nearest in our hearts, for democracy, for the right of those who submit to authority have a voice to grow in their own governments. And she's Woodrow Wilson. They take Woodrow Wilson's own words from his own speeches, and they protest with those words outside the White House. And so it was smart. It was not necessarily effective, although in the end it was, right? And then the straight legal road, and on the other side you've got murder and crime. And she says, to ask for freedom for women is not a crime. They began to get arrested for when the suffragettes were protesting outside the White House. They began to get arrested. So again, Nina Allender has all these cartoons that say, here's who we are. Here's really what we do. We are women. We are smart. We are not troublemakers or felonious people. This, I think you've seen. Those are just people of the day. Woodrow Wilson has allowed the suffragists to be put in jail, and he says, "What would you do for an American suffragist, What would you do for American suffrage, Mr. President?" Wilson finally does come around and say yeah, I guess I'm for suffrage, but it has no weight because he's not really behind it very much. And then these are some other, Ben Garrison, and then I think you have seen them all. Here's an example of a Jen Sorensen cartoon. Again, people find them wordy, but I just find them amazing. And she was sort of making fun of the people who thought that the choices were equal, and and also fun of the idea that people were going to we were going to all have our eggs hooked up to one system, and every woman was going to walk in lockstep. So I think Jen Sorensen's great. And then we've got all these allegedly Hillary's baggage, right, that they've not found too much on. And of course, then people think Hillary has her own problems, right? Donald Trump hates women, and people say, but you're still with Bill, right? So again, Hillary as the one ignoring Bill's infidelities. Of course, her husband's infidelities are her fault in this logic, right? Is this another Jen Sorensen? Again, so you can see pros and cons. And both of them come out to she's the only realistic choice. So, and then of course, yeah.
Oh, sorry, we had a question back by Nina Allender's cartoons.
Yeah.
Somebody just wanted to know, where did her cartoons get published, and was she paid for them?
She worked for, I think she got as paid as anybody working for the National Women's Party did. So they're still property of the National Women's Party, and you can go online and find them. But she was paid to work for the party. And she agreed to do it and chose to do it. And so that's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. But she wasn't making a big splash in big newspapers.
Oh. So speaking of big splashes, we have our questioner about memes responding. She says, memes don't require artistic ability, true, easy to create and share via social media platforms. Memes and GIFs are the primary way of communication in younger generations, as were newspapers and drawn cartoons were formerly. True.
I think that's true too. I've got a colleague who teaches political science at College DuPage, and one of her assignments, one of her test questions, I'm not sure if it's on every test, but she gives the students a blank political cartoon or and they create their own meme about it. Or they can submit their own. Yeah, so I think you're right. And I hate to say it because I love cartooning so much, but I got to say, for a quick laugh, man, a meme is great.
Yeah. So speaking of COD, we also had a question about what classes do you teach at COD?
Oh, well, if you were here in person, I would hand you this pencil that says take humanities classes, because we'll change mundanities into humanities. So I teach ideas and values, which is, how people get, what people do with ideas they get in life and where they get them from and what they do with them. I teach intro to the arts, intro to the humanities through the arts. So, what do painting and film and writing tell us, and what do even buildings tell us about who we are as a people. I teach arts beyond, so we just changed the name. We used to call it non-Western humanities, but now it's beyond Europe and the United States. So we look at China and India and Japan and Islam, which is not a country, but a culture, and African art and ideas. So, and I also teach women in the arts, which is one of the few women's studies courses we have at COD.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have anything else coming up that I can see. Thank you so much, Julia. This was fantastic.
Oh, well, good. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking around for so long, and thank you for coming. Happy 100 years, everybody.
Yay! Happy anniversary.